With all of that being said, beautiful people, let's take a little bit of a journey back in time to the beginning of this year, and let's retravel the ground and the road that we have followed this year, all of us communally together. We were originally going to do like a political story of the year and an economic story of the year, but as we started to sketch it out, we realized they were way too intertwined. I mean, it really was all one sort of complex, interesting, surprising, bizarre picture as we put it together. So we thought we would walk back through to think about how we got here. And we also want to give you a little bit of information about the way that the Breaking Points community grew this year, because that's, you know, what we were all a part of. So let's start with the less important part than the Breaking Points community, the national and international picture of what the year was all about. Let's go ahead and put this first part up on the screen here. So this is the presidential approval rating. So if you're looking at this, it starts actually in 2021, and right where the lines cross and Biden goes underwater in terms of his approval rating and really never recovers. I mean, there's little bits of up and down, but more or less he's significantly underwater. That really started at the beginning of 2022. And we started with this because there is not a more sort of fundamental baseline political metric than how people feel about the president of the United States. And the picture, based on this chart, was not pretty.
And when you think about that, you're like, okay, well, the entire year seems basically set, right? It's going to be easy. You have 2021, a terrible year for the Biden administration. Nothing gets done. The legislation falls apart. Inflation is sky high. It seems to be a national story. But then Russian troops began going on the border of Ukraine. And some of us ended up being completely wrong. Griffin, let's go ahead and put that up there on the screen. Not one of the better moments having to do one of these shows. Turned out, though, it was actually one of our biggest shows of the entire year.
The biggest show of the entire year, which I just want to pause to say we're going to get more into the specifics of Breaking Points, but I feel incredibly proud that you all and many other people across the country and around the world trusted us in that moment to try to make sense of what was happening. Because this is something we struggle with in foreign affairs coverage too.
Yes.
It is the most difficult area to find actual, real, credible information. Everybody's got an axe to grind. They're getting leaks from the CIA. They're getting links from the Pentagon. They're trying to promote this agenda or that agenda. And so it has been a real point of pride for us this year, and something that we have done our damnedest to live up to, that people have trusted us to understand the realities of what is happening with this war. So I want to say thank you guys for making that the case.
Thank you. But I think this underscores this show, both with you guys and just to this year, what an insane year it was. The day that happened, it just felt like everything was up for grabs, and not in a good way. Now all of a sudden we're talking about nuclear war for the first time in 40 years. Is China going to invade Taiwan? What does this mean? Dictatorship, autocracy, America. What is our role? Are the actual, NATO, is it set in stone? Is it going forward? What's happening? Germany, gas prices. When you consider the impact that this single event had on this entire year, it scrambled everything. And that's why it was such a difficult, but I think an impactful year to learn so much about politics.
Yeah, so speaking of gas prices, that was another important story, obviously, of this year, both politically, economically, and everything else in between. We had gas prices spike up over $5 a gallon. That was the average nationwide. Now that has a tremendous direct impact on people's wallets. It's really tough to make ends meet. It makes you feel like you're drowning when you see that price ticking up and up and up every time you go to fill up the tank in your car. And it also has massive political ramifications. I mean, between this and the low approval rating, seems like an open and shut case in terms of what is likely to happen. And this was reportedly something the White House was very concerned about as well, and went to some extraordinary lengths to try to bring down, and now gas prices have come down some. I'm not sure you can really attribute it that much to what the Biden administration did, but suffice it to say, they were worried about it.
Yeah, and they should have been, because Griffin, let's hit it. What happened? Well, again, it's not a particularly difficult story. You got bad approval rating, you've got some crazy shit going on in the rest of the world. Gas prices are $5 a gallon. What's going to happen? Well, it's obvious. The baked-in political theory that all of us are operating on is that this means that there's going to be the red wave. The red wave is baked in. Famously in Chicago, I think I did a prediction. I was like, full red wave. Every single one is going to go that way. We'll get into that.
I did moderate that a little bit. I just want to give myself a little bit of credit.
Well, that's why this dynamic works here, the two of us. But look, this was and was up until Election Day, this was the guiding philosophy for the way that we thought about stuff, because it was about fundamentals. And I think, again, a really amazing and interesting story of this year is it wasn't about fundamentals. And that's interesting.
Well, and here's another fundamental that was looking very dire for the Democratic Party, and more importantly for people everywhere in the country, which is we had the highest inflation since 1979. In particular, food prices skyrocketed. I know you guys saw it with your grocery bills, meat in particular, chicken. I mean, everything was just going up and up and up. Now, there were a variety of reasons for that, corporate price gouging among them. But the reality was this really hurt. And, people continue to struggle with the fact that prices have been so elevated. And, going back to the politics of it, it really painted quite a dire picture for the Biden administration, for Democrats. It looked like it was going to be a total historic level wipeout.
I think one of the things that unlocked too, as we'll go to the next one here, is about the Federal Reserve, is that when Washington was faced with 1979's the highest inflation since 1979, what happened? Nothing. The government actually didn't do all of anything except for the Fed, with the explicit target of raising interest rates and increasing the unemployment rate. That's something that we have spent so much time on the show talking about, because we think it's so important to underscore that the only element of the government that was doing anything about this was to try to increase the unemployment rate. Now, why is that? Because they want to drive down consumer spending. They want everybody to stay home. They want to reduce gas demand. That's the way that they miraculous plan to save gas prices. And that's just fundamentally bad.
And they wanted to discipline labor, which was getting a little uppity with these strikes and worker organizing, et cetera. Can't have that. Need to have a totally compliant workforce. So that was another goal of this Fed policy. And I mean, they all but stated it explicitly that, Larry Summers out there saying we need to have 10% unemployment. I mean, imagine the level of sociopathy to say something like that and the pain that that would cause to people across the country. So while there was so much that the federal government could have done to deal with an inflation that was caused by corporate price gouging, by supply chain issues, instead, they turned to the Fed to effectively crush workers and make people suffer as an explicit policy goal. As part of that whole situation, markets start to tank, and that was led by crypto, which
some of us suffered.
Has remained relevant.
Some of us personally suffered.
Has continued to remain relevant, and not only I feel bad for Saagar, but he's going to be fine. I genuinely do feel bad for people who have lost a lot of money in not just FTX but other crypto schemes, and at the same time, total mask-off moment for elites in DC, for elites in the press, especially the business press, that let Sam Bankman-Fried and others, but especially him, total con man, never got asked any questions, total puff pieces. We'll talk about that more later in the show, but that is one of the important stories of this year, is the collapse of crypto and everything that has gone down with it.
So why do we do this, right? This up until this point, which is, it's a basic story. You got GOP plus 8, you got high inflation, all of this. But then, why did the fundamentals not become fundamental this time? Well, the Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision in June genuinely did change everything. And it was really interesting to watch. And I had a friend at the time who was a big Supreme Court watcher. And he was like, a lot of people are sleeping on, we have one of the most culturally significant decisions of our entire lifetime that is happening just 3 months out before the general election. The thing was, though, is that even when it came out and you saw, and we'll talk about some of the confounding variables that were a little bit of a prediction of what was to come, there was this fundamental tension in the way that we were looking at the politics. We were like, well, Dobbs, okay, abortion, it's like 60-30, but ultimately, it's one of those things where it doesn't necessarily touch everybody. The economy does, gas prices. I don't have to tell people here living in Massachusetts, I checked your guys' average gas price over the last couple of months. It's been tough. The weather's hard enough up here, man. So it was a tough time for everybody across the entire country. We have California, one of the biggest audiences for Breaking Point, still at $5 a gallon, almost $6 a gallon. That was out there, and we were considering this is something that affects everybody. How much is this ultimately going to matter? That was the biggest question in politics.
Well, and we got some early indications that the answer was a whole fucking lot. It's gonna matter a lot. So these two election results ended up maybe being the most accurate sort of canaries in the coal mine for what would happen in the fall. You had an abortion referendum in Kansas. Kansas is kind of a red state.
Might have heard.
Went overwhelming. It wasn't even close, double digits for the pro-choice position in Kansas. So we're like, that was interesting. That was surprising. I thought it would be close, but I did not think it would be a blowout for the pro-choice side. So, we thought this was directly on the question of abortion. Is it going to be the same thing when you're talking about random congressional district in, let's say, New York? The answer was yes. You had a special election. You had a Republican candidate who was heavily favored, both in the polls and also based on the pundits. It was a district that I think Biden won very narrowly by maybe 1 point. So if you're looking at red wave, this district is gonzo. And Pat Ryan was the candidate that ran there, the Democrat. He's now a member of Congress. He wins, outperforms the polls, which, as you guys know, Democrats haven't been normally doing that. And so that was another real head-scratching moment of, maybe this Dobbs decision really did turn this whole election on its head.
Yeah. And then, as if 2022 wasn't crazy enough, Trump Mar-a-Lago raid happens. It's like European war, biggest since World War II, highest inflation since 1979, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Yeah, no, let's go ahead and have the FBI raid the former president's house. And so now we're like, now what? What the fuck is going on? So this was, again, though, an interesting moment for the people here who care about the GOP. Why? Well, immediately, Ron DeSantis comes out, and he's like, this is a egregious assault by the FBI. Glenn Youngkin comes out and speaks. Trump was never more powerful in the GOP than this day. And it remains to be seen. Is that the case if he does get indicted, which we'll talk a little bit about? What exactly is his power? To the extent do GOP voters care about electability? Do they care about persecution? But regardless, this is an unprecedented situation. Cable likes to use those words like historic, unprecedented. It's like, yeah, all right. But every once in a while you look at this like, oh shit, this actually is historical. This actually is
former
unprecedented.
President having his house raided by the FBI. Yeah, I'd say that qualifies.
Right.
I'd say that one does qualify. So Democrats, obviously, they'd been doing the January 6th commission, leaning into the case that democracy is on the ballot. And once you had not only the specter of the FBI raiding Trump's house and the increasing likelihood that the former president was going to be indicted, they leaned even more into a message about GOP extremism, which encompassed the abortion decision and also threats to democracy and also, by the way, some candidate quality issues that we'll get to in a moment. This all led to a very memorable speech with some controversial lighting choices. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
So
It's the red lighting.
the red lighting, personally, I didn't have a problem with it. He just went full dark Brandon. He was feeling himself right then. He just went for it. But, I was skeptical. I was pulling my hair out talk about the economy. My God, people are struggling. They're telling you their number one issue, the economy. Where is your plan? What are you going to do? And they're, doing these major primetime speeches focused, I'm not saying it's not important, but focused exclusively on MAGA extremism. And I just thought, I don't know if this is the right strategy.
And yet, it's as if the Republicans didn't want to do everything they could to shoot themselves in the foot.
Correct.
And with certain candidate quality issues, one of those being a certain trip to the grocery store for vegetables. Some people have another word for it. I personally learned that word for it. Griffin, play it for the people.
Thought I'd do some grocery shopping. I'm at Wegner's.
Wegner's?
And, my
Wegner's.
wife wants some vegetables
Wegner's.
for crudité, right? So here's a broccoli. That's $2. Not a ton of broccoli there. There's some asparagus. That's $4. Yep. And carrots. That's $4 more. That's $10 of vegetables there. And then we need some guacamole. That's $4 more. And she loves salsa.
Loves
salsa
some
there. $6.
Raw asparagus and
For
salsa.
a shortage of salsa. Guys, that's $20 for crudité, and this doesn't include the tequila. I mean, it's outrageous. We got Joe Biden to thank.
We have watched that 1,000 times at this point, and we still have so many questions.
It hits every time it hits.
No basket. Why are you buying it all separate? They have veggie trays. Where's the ranch?
You know, low-key, my favorite part at this point is when he walks in and he's so confidently like, I'm here, Wegner's. No, you're not. It's not a thing.
It's not.
So anyway, there were some candidate quality issues that were unfolding on the Republican side. I think we had a reminder, a sort of like last reverberation of that last night in Georgia with Raphael Warnock defeating Herschel Walker. And at the same time, shockingly, Biden and the Democrats actually started to do a few things legislatively. So you had the CHIPS Act that passed bipartisan, you had the Inflation Reduction Act, you had the PACT Act, and you had student loan debt relief, which is something that Biden had been dragging his heels on, and that I think ultimately, you know, when you look at the margin among young people, may have been quite decisive in a lot of these races. So you're starting to look at this and say, maybe this is gonna be a lot different than the red wave that was originally predicted. But
yeah, as with the yo-yo of 2022, well, we talked about the Federal Reserve. What about housing? You know, it's interesting for an insight. So YouTube just launched this, I would say, quasi-creepy feature where we could actually see what you guys are searching for on the research tab. It's not actually as bad as you would think. You know what the #1 search term is almost every single day? Housing, housing market, housing crash. And it really makes us and helps us understand about how so many of you are in pursuit of an American dream, which is lost. And we magnify it not just out from what's here. Boston, I don't think I have to tell everybody here about high rent prices or high real estate.
Yeah.
But across the entire country, Boise, Idaho, rent is up 30%. People there are struggling. You know, in the Catskill Mountain, like in rural areas, the average home price is now at a point where you need $100,000 a year to even make it. And then that's if you're lucky to have the 20% down payment. How are people supposed to make any of that work? And we see it consistently. And part of the reason why I would still bet, I was betting then, is I was like, I've never seen this level of just massive dissatisfaction. Like the American dream never has seemed more out of reach whenever you have high inflation, high gas. You can't buy a house. The worst time to buy a house in 40 years. Like this is a catastrophe. And maybe, just maybe, that's going to be enough to put the GOP over the edge.
yeah, and not only that, but voters were routinely telling pollsters that, you know, the economy really sucks. It's terrible, and it's our #1 issue. This is what we care about in the fall. And by the way, we think the Republicans are better than the Democrats on this issue. And so when you look at all of that, you start to think, well, Dobbs was a while ago, you know, maybe some of the potency and the raw emotion of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, maybe that's kind of faded. Maybe some of these other factors are going to be what ultimately wins the day. But that is not the story of what happens.
No, put it up there. Turns out some of us have egg on their face for the millionth time this year. Democrats hold the Senate. What an insane story. And one of the reasons why, again, is the fundamentals were not the fundamentals this time. And there's a lot of questions that are raised as to why did people vote the way that they did with the economy and all of that. And I think it arises a couple of things, which we'll talk about. Candidate quality, of course. Crudité certainly doesn't help. But he's not the only one. It's the entire Senate. You know, what was it? This is the first time that the Democrats have kept every single Senate seat, or any president has kept every single Senate seat since FDR in 1934.
Yes.
That's how extraordinary what happened in November was.
And it's also the first time, based on last night's results, that a party in power both gained seats in the Senate and gained governorships. So, I mean, you can look at this in a couple of ways, because on the one hand, you're like, yeah, but they still lost the House. So, I mean, was it really that great? You know, aren't you kind of overselling it? And I think that's fair. We do take for granted now this like divided government that yo-yos back and forth, and it's always going to be this close margin. It was not always the case. So I do think that, you know, both parties should aim higher to have a durable majority based on working class values and actually delivering for people. But given recent history, there's just no doubt that Biden defied the odds. I mean, he had a way better midterms than Barack Obama did, who was supposed to be the political savant. So, I mean, that's an interesting sort of plot twist there in and of itself. And then as if we needed any more added on top of this year, Donald Trump went ahead and announced for president. So here we go again. I mean, it's the rematch that absolutely no one in the country wants. Biden versus Trump, right? If you ask the American people, like, do you want Biden? Do you want Trump? They're like, abso-fucking-lutely not. And the parties are like, how about Biden and Trump? What do you say? So here we go again, I guess is all I can say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is stunning. It's like so much has changed in the last 7 years, and also like nothing has changed at all. And when you see Trump, the most boring announcement speech that we've seen in quite a long time, I did say though, for those of you who are watching our live stream, I was like, he can't hold this in. And lo and behold, within the 2 weeks, overturn the Constitution tweet, dinner with Kanye, the Nick Fuentes thing. I never even knew the guy. Already back to shit posting QAnon memes. So I was like, there's the man, there's the Donnie that we know and well.
That's right.
Will people care? I don't know. In 2020, not really, ish. I mean, he only lost by 40,000 votes. This time around, they're like, yeah, some of this is a little fucking crazy. They're
Seems
like, I'm not so sure about this.
Might kind of care at this point.
It's a jump question of, we have no idea. And that's part of why it's so fun to do this show and to learn and experience so much of this with all of you, is that we're all just trying to make sense of this shit together. Sometimes the fundamentals matter, sometimes they don't at all. Sometimes exactly what you think is gonna happen. You can even call the last presidential election, you could be totally wrong on the next one. You could call the last 20 and you could still be wrong with this. And it's given me actually just an even more like interest and faith in democracy.
It was almost like a return to some of the old political rules. It's like during the Trump era, political gravity has sort of been suspended. Like all of the previous truisms of politics were thrown out the window and we had to learn a whole new idea of how politics worked. One of those things was, it used to be all politics is local. During the Trump era, all politics has been national. These midterm results were highly regional. I mean, if you just look at Florida, the red wave was in full effect. New York as well had, significant gains for Republicans, and then the entire rest of the country goes in a different direction. The industrial Midwest actually was the strongest region in the entire country for Democrats. You had ticket splitters. This is, again, something that was like a dying breed where someone would go and vote for Brian Kemp, let's say, for governor of Georgia, and then go vote for Raphael Warnock for Senate. These are things that were supposed to be done over with. And you had a return of a sort to some older political norms and rules. Do they last? Does it change when Donald Trump's back on the ballot? I don't have a clue. And that is one thing. I shouldn't say this now because we're about to make fools of ourselves and make predictions for the next year. But I am going to take a lot of humility from these results, because even the polls, right? I mean, we were looking at the polls that were coming in and we're saying, okay, but in the last few elections, they have always understated Republicans. So I'm going to add in a few points for Republicans because that just is based on the previous trend, what makes sense and what seems to be responsible. And then you have Democrats outperforming the polls in in places like New Hampshire, places like Pennsylvania, places that really ultimately mattered. It's like, all right, well now I just have no idea. So we just have to all take it as it comes. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.